So, hello everyone. Hello everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining me in the show theatre this year, or for watching online if we're going to be putting this online. What a wait it has been. It's certainly been a long time since the last time I've been here talking, so it's great to be back with you all. So normally in the RISC OS Open Show talk, I have a fairly fixed format of giving an overview of what's been happening, where we are now, where we're going, and looking ahead. But in these interesting times, and in celebrating our 15th year at RISC OS Open, I'm feeling somewhat reflective. So before I indulge in my usual topics, I'm going to talk about something slightly different, as you can probably tell here. Why are we here? Why are we doing what we do? Why are we coming? Why, specifically, why is ROOL here as well? We all have our reasons. We're all kind of driven by our values and our beliefs, and I'd like to share with you what motivates the people behind RISC OS Open. Why are we doing what we're doing? So it all comes down to our purpose. So the people behind RISC OS Open, we don't get paid for our time, and we'll be passing a begging bowl round in a minute. We do sell some merchandise, and the slim margins there just get ploughed straight back into RISC OS Open and doing what we do. And all the money donated by the community into the bounty scheme makes its way into the pockets of the developers who do the work. So we don't take a slice of that. In fact, until recently we were taking a hit on that because we were VAT registered, so we ended up paying VAT on that. But we just took that hit. So our money is great and it can make things happen. It's not the thing that motivates the guys behind ROOL. So what is it that's motivating us? Well, the clue, I think, is in the name, RISC OS Open. So we care about being open and transparent in how we operate, in what we do, and we have always sought to be open and honest in our dealings with people and the way we operate, and I hope that's been reasonably obvious in the last 15 years. And we want the results of everything that we do to be accessible to the widest possible community of people. So we're not focused on specific, small, narrow opportunities. We're always thinking big picture. So we care about backwards compatibility, we care about future-proofing, we care about all of the platforms that RISC OS supports, and we care about thinking about future platforms for RISC OS as well. And another thing that's key to the way RISC OS Open operates is that we are basically a loose collective of helpers and volunteers, and we try to always be collaborative within RISC OS Open. So we don't act as individuals very often. We generally act as a group. So if you're talking to someone at RISC OS Open, you're speaking to the hive mind of all the RISC OS Open helpers generally. So we don't typically act unilaterally either. We typically consider things as a group. And more often than not, because of our drive about openness, we typically take things before we make any decisions and bring them back out to the community. So you'll quite often see us thinking out in the open, in the forums or in the wikis or even in a show. So we believe deeply that even if something is published for free, you still need to consider the implications of your use of it. So it's largely to the principles of open source. You give something away with open source and you allow people to take it and run with it. But we do that all the time at RISC OS Open, but we take great care to consider what the license was that it was published under and what that means to the people who are publishing it, and try and respect that. But B, always call out and say thanks, give credit where credit's due. So I hear about cases where people are taking TV manufacturers to court because they have used Linux and not respected the terms of the GPL. For us, this is critical to an open source project like RISC OS to be successful, is considering these things and making sure that we're not just saying, oh, it's open source, therefore we'll just use it, and forget about the owner of it. So these are all really important factors in what motivates us, and we believe that that is the fair thing, the fair way to operate. And if people want to interact with us, and we do try and interact with a large number of people across the whole community, we like to see that that's reciprocated. I think that's what we really look for. So in any collaboration that we have, we want to see our values being reciprocated back. So I hope that we've earned this trust over the years from the community, that we try and operate in this way, and we hope that we can also see some of that passed on into the other companies in the RISC OS community and people joining the RISC OS community as well. We want to be an influence, a good influence there. So that really underpins our purpose. And I hope it's useful me talking about this. It just feels like it could seem like we're an anonymous, faceless organisation making decisions about the future of RISC OS, and we don't want people to think that way. So, without further ado, this is our purpose statement, and really, this is something we wanted to just announce today, is unambiguously what is driving RISC OS Open. This is what's driven us for 15 years, and it's what will continue to drive us. I've certainly seen some concerns recently in the forums that decisions about RISC OS are being made behind closed doors, and while RISC OS Open is in the scene, that is not how we operate, and it's not how we want to be operating. So be assured, if it involves us, it's not going to be about decisions made behind closed doors. However, I want to tell you a personal story, which is back in the early days of RISC OS Open, there was quite a lot of tension between two camps in the RISC OS world. Yeah. There were some heated debates online, and advocates on both sides, and some of us remember this well. And occasionally I'd see something being said that I felt was an injustice, and maybe it was a claim that I felt was demonstrably untrue. And I would voice my opinions. But it only really added to the noise. It never was beneficial. And sometimes it was pretty unpleasant as well. And I realised in many debates there's strong feelings running on both sides, and it's hard to contribute without finding yourself falling on one side of the tracks or the other side of the tracks. And I suddenly realised that I represent RISC OS Open. We cannot be seen to be partisan, so we can't be seen to be taking sides, and now more than ever, and damaging our hard-won reputation. So I learned that the best policy for ROOL was to focus on this purpose and not on entering into any debates or differences of opinion. So sometimes there'll be these conversations on the forum about maybe concerns about one thing or another, and typically you won't see ROOL engaging in those debates, and you might be wondering, well, why aren't ROOL defending themselves, or why aren't ROOL giving their view of events? Well, that reason is why. It's my past experience. I don't want to add to noise. I want to just be seen to be acting. So I want you to judge us by our actions and not by the debates we engage in on the forum. I think we have to be neutral. We have to try and stay neutral from any one entity in the RISC OS community. So occasionally you'll see us express some opinions as individuals. We are still individuals. Someone has to shout, I'm not. So we will, but we always take great pains to make sure if we're doing that, we're doing it with a personal avatar, a personal hat on. You won't see someone with a ROOL hat on expressing their opinion in any debates like that. So, I can start diving back into the more usual format. I'll talk about a quick recap of the last 15 years. So, what has RISC OS achieved in 15 years that I've been in ROOL? So, I think ROOL were key in instigating and delivering the move to open source. That's both the move to shared source with Castle and the move afterwards to open source with RISC OS developments. I think without our persistence, it probably would have ended up staying as a proprietary operating system, and it would be, to all intents and purposes, dead by now, I think. RISC OS, its longevity now is due to it being an open source operating system, and that underpins its future. So I think that's great. We've ended up becoming the hub of a lot of what happens in the community. There's loads of really great sites in the RISC OS community. Iconbar, RISC-Osatory, RISCOS.info, various sites. And there's other material like Archive, fantastic. But I think back in the days of mud huts and stone tools, the community was circling around newsgroups and CompSys Acorn, all of those. But nowadays it's our forums, the wiki. It's great to see the life there. There's the GitLab server that we have where all the source code lives, and the package index that we have for things like Pacman. It's great to see the life that is constantly churning around in RISC OS and see it right there in the website. We've been driving a lot of bounties, so we've certainly, I think they've contributed a lot of things to the operating system, key things to the operating system, the bounty scheme, and it will continue to do so. So there's quite a lot happening there. There are 4 actively underway, under development, and we're having quite regular conversations with the developers involved there. One of them's not going the way we wanted to as well, so we've got some thinking to do. I think you'll have seen the file system bounty has not moved as fast as we would like, and we're rethinking our approach there, because what we don't want to do, it doesn't feel fair, is to take people's money into a bounty and then have it sit there for many years not making much progress. That doesn't feel like the right way to operate. But by and large, we've taken things which the community has said are important and we believe are important, and we're seeing them delivered through the bounty scheme, which is putting money in the pockets of RISC OS developers, which is great. We've also had some stable releases of RISC OS. I'd say 6 that we've stewarded. There have been a few others, but they didn't quite count. We also released a traffic light system that allows people to see how you get to stable and how stable are the various different platforms. So that's been a useful tool to help our conversations with other companies in the RISC OS community to make sure that they understand why do we believe one platform is less stable than another at a particular point. And I think all the end users just benefit from the fact that when we release an even-numbered version of RISC OS, they know that that's been well tested on their particular hardware. Whoops, my mouse pointer has disappeared, sorry. There we go. So the NutPy and Epic, so these are where we've negotiated with a lot of third-party software authors in RISC OS, and we're selling significantly discounted versions of their software. This has actually ended up putting about £21,000 during the course of that into the pockets of the people who wrote those third-party tools. So that's been really useful. Even though we sell it so cheaply, it still ended up generating a reasonable amount of money in the grand scheme of things. We have also somehow become obsessed with writing books. It's trying to become a publishing empire. So we've seen the style guide, the use guide, the basic manual, various books that we've been updating, keeping a very keen eye on keeping the essence of what it was that made them great when they were Acorn books, and just building on that and not reinventing them as something different. And we've brought down the development environment costs, but we've never managed to get them down to zero, so that's still challenging. Although we have sponsored copies and given them to, for example, some students and helped them develop without them having to pay for it. So we've paid the cost ourselves. And that has actually resulted in stuff being developed and fed straight back into RISC OS. So it does help. And RISC OS also runs, as we all know, from still supports really old hardware that's some people in the RISC OS community weren't born when it was released, and it will work just as happily on that as it will on a Pi 400, and almost works on a Raspberry Pi 02W. So it's not many operating systems can claim that, which I think is great. So looking ahead, if I can click enough times, we have nightly builds that we host on our website. These are automatically generated from the latest bleeding edge versions of RISC OS. We have more stable releases to come. So we released 5.28 in October last year, in the midst of COVID, and hopefully we'll have another stable release coming out in the next 12 months. Ideally, every couple of years we get the next stable release out. We have more bounties going on, so there is work happening on the file system, but that is the one that's not moving as quickly as we would like. The toolbox reunification, I talked about some of the past forking of RISC OS. This is starting to bring it all back together, actively being worked on. Paint is getting very close to finished now. We're already in the nightly builds, you're already able to play with all the new stuff that's happening in Paint. And we have a native client for Git, which is a very powerful tool for managing your source code. And it's an important step for RISC OS development, I think, to have a native Git client. We're having regular communication with a very enthusiastic developer there who's doing a brilliant job. Really pleased with that. And we have, as I said earlier, we've got our own server called GitLab, which is where all the source code to RISC OS lives. We're continuing to host that and see people contributing all the time. In fact, in the next day or two, there'll be some fixes going in for the Pi 02W. So that will be going in very soon, which is great, because that's quite a powerful thing. It's tiny, and it's about £15, so you can't complain about that. We're also in regular conversation with various other groups around the community, RISC OS Developments, CJ, Micros, various other people, and we try to keep in touch with these guys and make sure that we're aligned and we're not creating new forks for the future, which is always a risk with an open source operating system. There's nothing to prevent someone from just going off and creating their completely new version and not caring about backwards compatibility or not caring about beagleboards or whatever. So Yeah, our communication with these companies is very important. A side note, just to celebrate the fact that we've got some different branding going on, we're going to release a new theme soon for the desktop. Some people on the forums recently spotted my screenshots, had some little bits of theme in there, just as a little teaser. So one of the things we're doing is playing with the fact that the latest version of the WIMP on the nightly builds supports some customization you can do on the icon bar to make it look a bit less boring. So that's what we're taking advantage of there. And the big announcement that Rod have built up is we are buying out Microsoft. No, we're releasing the user guide free of charge on the website later today, and also we're going to be publishing the sources to the user guide, which is the FrameMaker document, which will be going in GitLab. And not only is it free, but thanks to a donation from CJ Micros, he's allowed us to buy a more expensive font license, which means that anyone else in the community, be it commercially or not commercially, is able to republish the user guide themselves. So for example, RComp or RISC OS Direct might be able to put the user guide PDF on their distro free of charge, and there's no more legal encumbrances to prevent that, which is great news. And hopefully we can start operating a similar model with some of the other popular books as well in the future. So that's a big step forward. It's something that's actually been in the works for a long time, and it's I think it's one of those ones where people weren't sure why we weren't publishing it, and it was because there was quite a few conversations happening behind the scenes to sort out all of the blockers. So aside from that, all that remains is me just to say thank you to everyone for your support in the last 15 years, and here's to the next 15 years. So that was it. Any questions?
Yeah. So I like the new purpose and safeguarding past, present, and future. But I think you alluded to the element and risk with open sourcing that somebody may just go off, and with 64-bit potentially being out there, what's to stop somebody developing a 64-bit version that doesn't really as closely mapping to a 32-bit element that we've got now, and then cutting off a lot of the users, because active developers, there may be a small group of active developers who want to go that way, but that may not be the best thing for the community.
Yeah, so there's probably only a handful of people in the world capable of doing it. That's one advantage.
Yeah.
And we know most of them.
So it's a bit arm twisting.
You know, or we can at least be aware and talk to them. So one guy who's very active, and you'll know, who's been quite instrumental in modernising and updating RISC OS is Jeffrey Lee. I think he's well positioned to help move that particular aspect forwards, or at least to provide really sound, sage advice on the best ways of doing it. And we talk to Jeffrey quite regularly. There is nothing to prevent someone from just going off behind closed doors, coming up with their 64-bit RISC OS fork, and then suddenly announcing it to the world, here it is, by the way, it only runs on this particular hardware, and this is what I wanted to do. And that, there's nothing to stop that, but it's difficult to see how that would be hugely successful for the existing community unless it's something that everyone can make use of and benefit from. So I think, for the most part, we think move to 64-bit RISC OS is going to be a fairly open process that's going to require a lot of coordination, a lot of testing by a lot of different parties to make sure that it works correctly. and it's not going to be quick or easy. So I think a lot of it will require a lot of consultation about, here's the two hard choices we have, what do we think, community, will be the best or the least worst? Because no matter how you slice it, you're probably going to leave a chunk of stuff behind, not least application. It's going to be another big step, like going from 26-bit to 32-bit was a big step. Even going from pre-strong arm to strong arm was a bit of a step. All of these steps leave behind a certain amount of collateral damage that's 64-bit is going to have the same sort of impact. So I think it will be, it's one of our big goals is to get 64-bit compatibility. We've set a new set of goals for ourselves, and I think they're published on the wiki as our roadmap of the big 6 things that we want to do. So we're happy to collaborate with anyone. Some of us are pretty sound developers ourselves, so we've got a history of developing in RISC OS, so I think we've got some useful ideas ourselves. So we're certainly willing to give advice at the very least to anyone who wants to do it. You next, Chris?
You said the fix for the 502 will be going in soon. Are you intending to do a fix for the compute module for eMMC, or more eMMC, because that's something that currently doesn't work.
I'm not aware of anyone at ROOL working on that, no.
Right. I mean, the 502 is much more mainstream.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
So no one's working on that right now.
And I don't think the people doing the new boards are working on that, because they're using the compute module Lite, I think, for their boards. So
Okay.
they won't have to first that. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Hi.
Yes, you spoke about collaboration with various people. I was wondering whether you get any collaboration from ARM. Now, I mean, when Linux, there was early collaboration, wasn't there, to get Linux running on ARM processors. And ARM collaborated with the Linux world to make sure that Linux works on their ARM processors. Now, I know we're a very tiny community compared with Linux, and ARM could say, well, we're too small.
Yeah.
But, do you get any collaboration from ARM?
No, we don't really have any dealings with ARM at all.
Because if you're going to go 64-bit, isn't collaboration with some of their programmers or whatever going to be useful?
I suspect we would never manage to get on their radar. They would probably just tell us to RTFM, look at the ARM architecture reference for 64-bit and figure it out.
You could bribe them.
Yeah.
I
could bribe them with RISC OS Open T-shirts. So no, I think it's quite a small world, Cambridge, and a lot of us know a lot of people from different companies. I probably know some people at ARM and don't even realise they're at ARM. I think that solving RISC OS on 64-bit it's not really an ARM problem, it's more a RISC OS problem, as in all of the difficulty lies on the architecture of how RISC OS is designed and how the kernel behaves and all of the internal APIs. So that's where it's hard. The understanding the ARM architecture side is not the hard bit. So it probably wouldn't be that much benefit because those guys would have the whole RISC OS learning curve to figure out. Whereas most people on the RISC OS side are already quite intimately familiar with how ARM chips work. Hello.
I believe Geoffrey has been working on multiprocessor cores for RISC OS. Can you say anything more about it?
It's another one of our big 6. I honestly don't know the current status of that. So we check in with Geoffrey more formally, probably a couple of times a year, on how things are going. I have a bleary-eyed memory that there was some sort of conversation yesterday between one of the ROOL guys and Jeffrey, but I haven't seen that yet, so I don't know what's happening there. But I think that's a much relatively lower hanging success story than 64-bit, but the benefits are huge. I mean, even that Pi 40 2W has 4 cores, and you think, well, there's a lot of compute power there. Something so cheap and so small, and RISC OS can't access it all yet. So the value of what Jeffrey's doing is huge. Whereas the disruption it causes is relatively small. So it's well worth it. So I hope he's doing well. I'm sure he is. But it's, again, for him, it's another one of those things. It's the unpaid labour of love in the background. So I hope long may he continue doing this stuff. It's great. Any other questions? Anyone else? Yeah.
Many years ago, I was running VAX VMS systems, which are 32-bit. Digital introduced the Alpha, which is 64-bit. As part of their migration, they had a lot of VAX macro, which is assembler applications code. So they wrote a compiler for it.
Right.
So they treated it as a source language and compiled it into 64-bit alpha code. Is that a feasible approach for some stuff?
Sort of, yeah. So 64-bit, there's a lot of different ways we could tackle that, and one of them is almost like a just-in-time emulating, compiling way. So you basically run RISC OS as is for legacy reasons, and you have a thing that's almost an emulator running RISC OS in an emulator on a 64-bit architecture, and every time it encounters a new bit, it turns it into 64-bit and remembers what it did. That's an approach, but it has its pros and cons. As with most things like this, it's a very complex topic, and it's. But yeah, it's. The downside ends up being to really make the most of the architecture. You want nearly nothing to be running in that world, because none of the stuff in that world sees the fact that it's in a 64-bit architecture and is benefiting from that. So what you want, I think, is to be as native as possible running in the 64-bit world, so that everything running on top of RISC OS is naturally benefiting from it. But the problem is it's going to be really hard for all of the applications that exist in RISC OS to work that way without them also being updated, brought into line with what the operating system can do. So for it to really work well, there's a period of quite a lot of disruption needed again. Anything else?
You've essentially got for 32-bit like RISC OS, what Revill does for 26-bit RISC OS currently.
Yes, that's basically really simplified. That would be a way to get there. Yeah, I think Emulaw is a wonder. It's amazing, and it's great that it exists, but it makes me a little bit sad as well, because it reduces the motivation to go and fix all the software that's not 32-bit compatible.
But then half of this software, over time, you've lost the source code, so what do we do?
It's the same job that RISC OS Open have been doing, is the archaeology, to go out and dig it out, find the people who own the estate of the person who has died, who wrote the software 30 years ago. It's that 30
job. Years old, who's to say anybody's still got a real floppy disk with the source code on it?
Indeed, it'll be in the loft of someone who inherited the thing from there. So literally that is what RISC OS Open have been doing for 15 years, going out and finding stuff like Frogger, is it? Finding the source code to things. getting it off badly corrupted floppy disks and things. The same thing is true, yeah. That because Amulor exists, there isn't that motivation to go and do that with all of these kind of useful bits of software, which then puts you in the situation where this software isn't benefiting from what the 32-bit RISC OS has, which is all the lots of memory and all of the other good stuff. So it's great, we needed it, but it's still a little bit sad.
Yeah, but in a perfect world we wouldn't need it, but this is far from a perfect world. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are we good? Well, thank you very much.